A while back, we did a video on finding early American ancestors in New England, and we got tons of comments on it. And we got a lot of requests to dig into early American genealogical research, specifically in Virginia. So I'm very excited. I've invited a professional genealogist to join us here in this video to kind of help pave the way for tracing our ancestors back to Virginia just prior to the Revolutionary War and coming forward. Jeri Satterwhite-Dearing specializes in Virginia research in her work as a professional genealogist at Legacy Tree Genealogists. Welcome to the show, Jeri.
Hi, how are you? Thanks for being here.
I'm doing great, and I'm so glad that you're here. We have so many folks who are really interested in this topic, and let's just jump into it. I've got questions for you. What are some of the unique challenges that face people who are trying to research ancestors in Virginia?
I think the main thing is the further back you go, the different record types that you would be using, and you won't have census records and necessarily marriage records or death certificates because that didn't come till much later. But those records are there; they are available, and you just have to really know where to dig and what to look for. I find that I rely more on land records, tax records, court records, that type of record, because when you don't have census records, the further back you go, say before 1790, maybe 1783, when they have county type census, then you're looking at needing to rely on tax records and more looking for your ancestors in the land records. And land records are full of all kinds of genealogy clues for your family as you dig in deep.
And it can be a bit of a challenge, I think, for folks who, as they're looking at a new area, like maybe they're new to their Virginia research, and we hear about things like you're mentioning the land records, the tax records. That could be new territory for us. It can be a little intimidating, can it, to jump into a record collection you haven't worked before?
Right, and especially because then you're relying on usually the original documents, which means reading the handwriting of the time, and that takes practice. It's like when you first learn to do cursive writing in school, and so it's not that hard. It just takes a little bit of time, and so it's kind of fun because they write different and the terminology is different, but that's where your little dictionary comes in, and it's practice makes perfect. Just the more you do, the easier it gets. And most of those records are going to be at county level. If you have a burned county, then you may have to rely on state records. The Virginia state records may have more than what is left for a burned county, but they're there. There's all kinds of records that are there, and it's just a matter of knowing where to go. And so my first recommendation would be to whatever county you're going to be dealing with, first go maybe to Family Search and go to their wiki for the county and read what they have to say about what records are available for that particular county and start there. And make a research plan, to make your notes, determine exactly what to look for. I know that you've done a couple of past episodes, especially I think it was episode 64, where you talked about how to do research and using Family Search. And I think those are things you need to learn a little bit before you jump right in, and I think that would be a really good start for if they're not familiar with Family Search, which is one of the best places to go for looking up your records when you're starting out. So, yeah.
And free, which is great.
And it's free. That's right. And yeah, all of it is free. And so definitely a good place to start with. And learning about the county, learning about the formation of the county. That's almost a genealogical research adventure in itself, because you need to know these counties change so quickly over time, and you need to get back to what that parent county was. And it's important to know the genealogy of the counties and know where to look for those records, because they're not all just going to be in today's county. You may have to go back to multiple counties to find those records.
Typically, when a record was created in a particular county, and then that county maybe splits out or changes, and
Right.
Folks should be looking in the county that it was at the time. Would that be safe to say?
Exactly. I would say so. I mean, most records follow as they go, but not all of them. They don't all follow. So don't make the mistake, or like you might be going, that's it, I'm done, I can't find anything else. Step back one time, go back one formation, and then, until you really don't find anything. But you'd be surprised where those records will be in many different places, and they might just be in the courthouse basement. I've come across that many times as well. So in Virginia, not all deed records are going to be online. Like here in North Carolina, we are really great. Our counties have so made records really available online, but in Virginia, they might not be on Family Search, and you may have to go to a courthouse and to actually see those records. But they're getting better about getting them filmed and stuff. And so, and then I think if you've exhausted some of that, or in going hand in hand with what you're doing, tax records, like I mentioned before, tax records, all these put your person in their place and time, and that's what you're looking for, because you always want to remember, that a man by one name is not necessarily that man. And so always remember that, because there's so many same named people throughout history, and you have to be careful which one you're chasing and getting the right guy. So it's important.
Right. Jeri, you mentioned, I love your idea about the genealogy of a county, really getting to know the history of the county at the same time as we're getting to know the history of our family. And you mentioned burned counties. Now, for seasoned genealogists, they've heard that many times, but maybe somebody who's new, who's been researching other parts of the country, and now they're finding them down a family line that takes them into the deep South. Tell us a little bit about what you mean by what's a burned county, why did it get that way, and what does that mean to the records?
Generally, it had a lot to do with war, and especially during the Civil War for the South. We had so many courthouses got burned. But it happens even in today's time. We see floods, we see fires. And so when you go to the county, look at your county history, it'll tell you, it's on Family Search in particular, it'll tell you what counties were burned, and then you can determine where else to look for records. I had a project recently that was in Ouachita County in Arkansas, and the county was totally burned. I mean, there was nothing really left. But at the state level, I was able to find the tax records. And so for the client's ancestor, we were able to place him in that county in the time that we needed to place him there, because there was no information about him anywhere. So those records were burned at two different times, one in like the 1800s and then one later on. So that's pretty common. And they just have such record loss. One thing that happened back in the probably 1800s is when we had all these burned counties. So when you would get your deed, you would do your deed, you take it into the courthouse to get it recorded, and you'd leave it, and the clerk would record it. So when you're looking at a deed book, you're not looking at the original, because they didn't keep your original deed. They recorded it, they handed it back to you, and you took it home to keep it in a safe place. And so we were so fortunate that when we had burned counties, that they would call all the people in, bring your deeds back in, and record them again. And so that's how we end up with, still having deeds that were probably burned the first go around in the clerk's books. So I inherited deeds from my great grandmother that were in a trunk. That is probably what started this whole journey 30 years ago. And
Is that right?
one of the deeds was from 1812. And so it was just amazing. They had kept those deeds. And the courthouse over in Orange County did not have that deed. So I took it over there and they got to copy it into the deed book. And then they had it. So yeah, there's a lot of ways to get around the burned counties.
That's very encouraging that they may have brought records back in, done it again. Maybe people today are bringing their records in. How do they end up at the state level? You mentioned a couple times, maybe check with the state archives. Was there a process where every so often the counties were supposed to send copies of books to state, or is that happening much later?
Right. Well, I think it did. Like for North Carolina, particularly, so many of our marriage records have gone to the state. So they're at our archives now, and so they came out of the county's hands. I don't know, maybe because they just kept getting burned to the ground, and so they ended up, at the state level, at the state archives for most of them, and so your state archives is a good place for your research. State libraries are good, like the Virginia State Library. Yes, you couldn't ask for better. And online
Awesome.
and offline, it's a great resource for learning and looking for records as well.
Excellent. Well, you've mentioned a couple of different types of records. We talked about tax records. Would we find tax records for somebody who doesn't own property?
That would be like your personal property tax records, and then you had land tax records. So there's two different ones, and you want to look for each. They may only be just one white pole. That means the one person that's over the right age to be taxable. Might be a horse, might be a silver watch, different things like that. And then there's the land tax, where they're going to tax you on how much property that you own. Also included in the property tax would be enslaved persons. And so if you're doing African American research, especially for Virginia, I think that's where I've seen it the most. And you would see, so for whoever you're looking up, and if you knew that they were an enslaver, they would have these people listed by their names, their first names, because that's generally all they had. And some of them were sorted out by age. So you would have a group, you might have the group listed. It might depend on the county, and not necessarily every county would be the same. But you would have like maybe age under 15 or something, or under 16, and then over 16. And while that's a broad range, you're looking for every little thing you can when you're doing that type of research. And so those are the kind of things, that you would see in the tax records. And another great resource is chancery records, which I love. They're one of their court records. And that is through the Virginia Library. And you go in there and you can search by plaintiff or defendant, or just the surname. And I usually just do the surname when I do my search. And you go to each county. You just choose your county, and then you choose your name. And it'll bring up all these folders of court records. And everybody sued everybody just like they do now. Everybody was in court all the time. And you would look in those records, and sometimes it'll just be maybe a lawsuit over land, and it's usually land. It could be as simple as a lawsuit over a horse or an enslaved person as well. But a lot of times you would find records that would involve like state records, probate records. And every now and then you will really get lucky, and you could find a whole family's history in some of these files, that just like it'll explain the parents, the grandparents, the grandchildren. I've had them go many generations in one file, and the neighbors and everybody. So it puts your person again in their place and time, and helps you from, getting them confused with somebody else. But
Great
I
point.
would say that if you don't look at those, you're missing out totally. Um, they are refilming, I think, a lot of the records right now. And so if when you go and search for it, your file doesn't come up, you would be able to see the file folder. You might not be able to see the contents of it, but then you could actually take that information and go to your county level court records. Again, I would go through Family Search and do your search in the catalog by the county, not just a record search, right? And by doing that, then you can actually find that those folders are still going to be within the county. There's not the chancery records, just kind of put them all in one place for you to go find them. But this way, you'd have to dig a little deeper, but it's always rewarding to do that. So,
Oh, well worth it. So you've mentioned
yeah.
several really important types of records: chancery court records, deeds, wills and estate records. What other types? You have a list. Colonial tithe tables. What's that?
Those were the really early, they're like taxing, and it has to do with who the person, by their age, and it's if they're old enough to be taxed. And so it's another form of a tax record. And those are the really early lists that you would, if you're getting back really far then. So you might not need those for a while, but if you get lucky and you really are getting back pretty far, then those are good.
I imagine to be able to really use these records, we have to really understand things like geography and the law. What are your recommendations to a genealogist on really getting to understand the law? What's a good way to go about that?
Reading, taking classes. I mean,
Yeah.
that would really be. There's so many classes available online nowadays, just from the comfort of your home, to be able to learn a lot. Um, that would be the best thing, to get used to it. And learning the law is a little bit more complex, but it is important.
Yeah.
You know, particularly, like, so if somebody got married, would they have been the right age to get married? It's a good way to separate a person out that might be the same name and you're not sure if they are or not. But that's would be one thing. Whether they could buy and sell land, whether they could be a witness, all those ages change frequently.
Any other resources that you think should really be on the forefront of the minds of people who are going to be digging into their Virginia roots?
I think maps, love maps. Land and maps are my favorite. The Rumsey collection, yeah, I think you did an episode on them too. I believe
Love
a
them,
while back I saw
yes.
that one. Oh my gosh, it was great. And I definitely look for you in Google. You mean you can Google. That doesn't not beyond me to go in there and Google historical maps for Roanoke County, Virginia, and just whatever comes up. And some of those older maps have the landowners on them. I've got a huge map collection, and you're talking about from the formation of the county. They will have the landowners' names written where their land was, and so maybe your person might not own land. Maybe they were just tenant farmers, but you found their names and you want to know where they were when they were in that particular county and who their neighbors were. And so you go and look and see who they were living around. And that also gives you a way to look for more records that might involve your ancestor as well. But
Well, that makes great sense. Maps are such an important part of it. It's all location and time frame, right?
yeah, because everything was about land. And it still is, but it always has been about the land. And so you don't want to bypass that. You don't want to just look at census, marriage, death, and that's it. You just in birth records, you really need to understand the context of their life and just everything that was going on around them and the area that they lived in. And know who they are, say their name, know who they were, and make them come back, make them be alive. It's
Exactly.
important.
That's a great way to look at it. Yeah, all the things that you've been talking about, we'll have in our show notes article for this episode. So folks watching on YouTube can look down below the video and find the link for that, or you can go to genealogygems.com. Jeri, if people get really stuck and they just feel like I need help with a professional genealogist, how could they get in touch with you, and what do you guys do at Legacy Tree Genealogists?
Well, they could contact, we can get them steered to the right person. And we have a wonderful team, and we do good work. So if they, if they get stuck, sometimes you might not have the years to go and take the time to take classes and do everything, but it's good, if you can. But absolutely, come and join us. We'll be happy to get you on the right track and help you find your ancestors. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a good feeling to be able to take a big leap forward, and professionals can help you do it. In fact, everybody check out the show notes and that description down below, because there'll be a link there for you, our link for Legacy Tree Genealogists. And I think there comes a little discount with that too that you can apply to your project. Jeri, this has been terrific. Thank you for giving us a kind of a jump start into our Virginia genealogy, and I hope we'll get a chance to talk again.
Okay, me too. Thank you, Lisa.